Alhamdulillah, العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. So today, alhamdulillah, we're going to start on page 37 and the chapter, Those Who Do Not Understand These Words. Okay, so here we are. This is the book, Those Who Do Not Understand These Words. And talking about what the Imam was talking about, rahimahullah, in the previous chapter, what he's talking in the previous chapter was the importance of patience and gratitude. And he was talking specifically about how wealth is more of a test than poverty. To be grateful with wealth is a greater test than being patient with poverty. Why? So what he explained in the last chapter, he said that when someone is poor, it means they don't have the means to do a lot of things they want to do. And that includes haram things, right? That's the difference. When we think about poor and rich, someone who is poor has limited means, right? They can't travel that far. They can't buy certain things. They don't access to certain things. Someone who's wealthy has greater access to all kinds of things. And those things can be either lawful or unlawful. So a poor person is patient, but they have to be patient because they have no choice. If they want to do sin, it doesn't matter. If they wanted to mess around and do haram things and go to haram places, they want to go to Las Vegas or wherever they want to go, they can't because they don't have the means. Whereas a wealthy person, their test is to show gratitude. They have the means. If they wanted to do haram things, if they wanted to do gambling or drugs or prostitutes or whatever, if they wanted to, they could. They have the means, but they're being tested, and therefore their gratitude is greater. That's why their reward is greater. This is why he says that at the end of the last chapter, he said the majority of scholars have made consensus that the grateful and wealthy person is better in the sight of Allah the Exalted than the patient and poor person is, because this person has a greater test. Because what we mean by gratitude, the meaning of gratitude, because people ask this question frequently, like, okay, how do I show gratitude to Allah? You show gratitude to Allah. Your gratitude is manifested through you using the gifts that Allah has given you to please Allah. So you're using your health. Allah has blessed you with health. So you're using your health to pray. You're using your health to worship. You're using your health to fast. You're using your health to do all other acts of good good deeds and worship. On the other hand, or in addition to that, if you have a lot of wealth, you're using that for good causes. You're going to use that to set up awqaf, a waqf, or you're going to give sadaqah. You're going to help people in need. You're going to help other family members. You're going to use that money to bring people together. You're going to use all these gifts that Allah has given you to please Allah and do what Allah has commanded you to do. That's how you show gratitude. So the Imam starts this next chapter, and he says, despite everything we said in the previous chapters, there are some people who will mock, and they'll say, "Oh, please, right? Well, like, how can it be more of a test to be wealthy?" And they'll say, and this is what he says. He says, let God distance me from the causes of harm and poverty. Then let him test me with wealth. Right? They'll say, how can that be a problem? Let him test me with wealth. And they'll mock the word test. They'll say, how is it a test? Yeah, let him test me with wealth. I'd be happy. If I had $1 million, if I had 2 million pounds, if I had however much money, I wouldn't be a test. I would solve all my problems. I'd pay off this and pay off this debt and pay off my mortgage and blah, blah, blah. And people have this attitude. But the proof of this is in the pudding, as we say in English. The proof is in the pudding. There are examples of this in real life. So now I don't know what it's like in Singapore and Malaysia, but I can tell you here in the UK and parts of the West, we have these people called lottery winners, right? We have these people called lottery winners, and these are people who they live normal lives, right? Okay, they might have a 9-to-5 job. They make very average salary compared to the rest of the population, and then they buy a lottery ticket, or they buy a lottery ticket every week, and then one day they win, right? And they win some really, really huge amount of money. It could be 10 million pounds, 20 million pounds, 30 million pounds, something astronomical, something that they would never make in a lifetime doing a normal job. And the first assumption is my life's problems are over, right? I'm never going to have another trial in my life because, you know, if anything goes wrong, I'll pay for it, right? If I go into debt, it's paid for. If I need a medical emergency, I'll pay for it. If I need to fix something, I'll pay for it. And so on and so forth. But these people, because they don't understand that there's a test that comes with wealth as well, not poverty that's a test, there's a test that comes with wealth as well, they fail this test. And they end up, and you can go online and read about this, so many of these lottery winners, they end up maybe a year later, 2 years later, they end up broke again. They blow all the money because they go on world tours and they go and do stupid things. Their families get broken because they end up fighting with their wife or their husband over the money. So that ends up in divorce, and there's some big settlement. They lose all their friends, right? Because again, wealth is a test. It can change people, right? So, you know, you might have a neighbor, right, who you might say hi to every once in a while, but then he finds out that you just won 30 million pounds in the lottery. Now he wants to be closer to you, right? He wants to remind you of how, you know, people start using and abusing you. And so this isn't really appreciated, how this can happen, right? So people think, oh, I'm going to make all this money and I'll get all this money and that's it. All my life's problems will be solved. And it's no, a whole new set of tribulations come along and they're worse. So these people end up, after winning the lottery a year later, 2 years later, they end up in a worse situation than they were before because they're broke again. They have to go back to their original job. They've lost their family. They've lost friends. They've been through so much heartache. They've been humiliated. And it's not a nice situation. And I've seen other situations. I mean, something that's far more common, I think, than the lottery winner, a far more common thing. Now, again, I'm speaking about the UK here. I don't know what it's like in Singapore and Malaysia, but in the UK, 20 years ago, there you go. I'm aging myself. I'm telling you how old I am. But 20 years ago, when I was at university, when I started university, the system was, because the government for some reason was trying to encourage everyone to go to university, which is not ideal, but that's another discussion. But if you were doing a 3 or 4 year degree program, what happened was you'd arrive at university, 18 years old, 19 years old. You're doing a 3 or 4 year degree. Your first year does not count. Your first year of your degree does not count, right? It's just you just have to make sure you pass that grade, just pass that year. But whatever grade you get that year will not go towards your final grade on your degree. Right, so that's the first thing to bear in mind. And the pass grade was something like really low, like 37%, like a slug could pass. Okay. Then they give you your student loan, right? Because now you get a student loan. So they're giving you, several £100s a month, which is a lot of money for someone that age, right? Some of the 17, 18 years old, 18, 19 years old, that's a lot of money. All of a sudden you're just getting, £500 a month, whatever it is. And you're being told, don't worry, you're going to pay this off several years later when you're in your career and you're working and so on and so forth, and you have a full-time job, right? So when you're 18, 19 years old, you're not even thinking about that. You're like, oh, okay, that's way into the future. And then on top of that, it's their first time away from home, right? So you said if someone is 18, 19 years old, it's their first time living away from their parents. Their first year of their degree doesn't even count. They don't really have to take it seriously. And they've got a lump of money. So what do? They go crazy, right? They just party all year long. They blow all that money and they just party all year long. And they don't do anything to help their degree. They don't do anything to actually acquire knowledge in that time. It's just complete utter waste because they don't have any sense of responsibility. They're like, oh, that's cool, right? I just have to attend classes every once in a while and I just party all the time. And it's a waste. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. And a blessing, which is the fact that you're at university, which should be a blessing. You're at university, you have the means to study, it's completely squandered. So you can see that's more of a common example, more common than the lottery winner. But this is the thing, people don't get that having extra money is not always a blessing. You should always just assume it's a blessing. There's a test. There's something that comes with it. So when Imam al-Buti talks about these people, they say, oh, Allah, they say, fine, let me be tested with wealth. These are people who, by and large, would be atheists. They would be secularists, right? They're people who would not believe in an afterlife, or Allah knows best, they could be Muslims who they might call themselves Muslims, but they don't fully get the picture, right? They don't fully get the picture. They don't fully understand that this is the nature of this life, and that it's all, right? And Allah has said that He will test you, like in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 155. Allah says, right? We're definitely going to test you, right? There's a lot of ta'keed, a lot of emphasis in that ayah. So we have to understand is that Allah is the one in this, and Allah is the one in charge of all of this, and He's the one who is going to, who determines all of this. Allah's the one who determines all of this, and we're not questioning His justice, and we will all be brought back to Him. And He says that even though this person does not call it a test, right? So you're being tested with wealth and you're being tested with poverty. Even though these people don't call it a test, what He goes on to say here is that doesn't change. That doesn't change the fact of the matter that it is a test, right? So someone's ignorance of something doesn't change the fact of what it actually is. So if you're desperately thirsty and you're dying, quote unquote, you're dying for a cup of water, and someone hands you a cup of water with a sulfuric acid in it, right? That's not a blessing, right? You might think, oh, it's a blessing, and we get some drink. No, but that's actually sulfuric acid inside there. Don't drink that, right? Just because you think it's water, you think it's H2O, you think it's H2O, it's actually H2SO4. That doesn't make it otherwise, right? It's still a test, and you just say, okay, I'm thirsty, but I can't drink that because that will kill me. So even though people don't see it as a test, it still is. So people get caught up in this fantasy, and the part of the problem is that people think, as he goes on to say in this chapter, people go on to think that this world, especially, we're talking about Muslims now, we're talking about, say, secular atheistic type of people, because they think that this world is the only world and that they're going to die and that's it, right? They don't understand that, or they assume that that their happiness lies in this life, right? That they think that if I'm ever going to be happy, it has to be here. If I'm ever going to be, quote unquote, successful, if I'm ever going to be, quote unquote, in comfort, it has to be here, right? But they don't understand, because they don't believe in the next life. They don't believe that, no, your true happiness, your true success is in the next life. So the Imam goes on to say, so he goes on to say, he says, nevertheless, we should complete an explanation of this issue from all sides and considerations. And he says, the person who sees this world as the sole opportunity for life hold on, someone in my house did not get the message that I don't want the vacuum cleaner on right now. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, but we cannot hear the vacuum. Maybe you can.
Oh, yeah, it's distracting. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry, I let people know, but okay. So the Imam goes on to say that the person who sees this world as the sole opportunity for life, and there's no life that follows it, does not understand that any meaning of necessity, does not understand any meaning of the necessity to have patience with tests. He sees no reason to be grateful for whatever blessings he has in this world, and therefore he cannot make himself bear any difficulty with patience or to be grateful for any good. So because he sees this life as his one chance for quote unquote success, or his one chance for quote unquote bliss, he thinks therefore that anything bad happens to him can't happen. Like, no, this is my one chance. I can't have anything bad happen to me. No. And they express frustration, and they express bitterness and resentment. And they want more and more of the good things, what they think is good. They think, no, I have to have more wealth. I have to have more possessions. I have to have more things. And then they don't, and you can see where this goes. And this also leads to a lack of morality, right? It's like, like if someone doesn't believe in the next life, if someone doesn't believe that they're going to end up standing before Allah, guess what? They're going to cut corners and things, right? They're going to pull tricks. So for example, now Imam al-Buti talks about this. Imam al-Buti, for example, he talks about this in Qubla Yakiniyat al-Kawniyah, right? The greatest universal sureties. He talks about this. He says, what's the difference when it comes to, say, let's just talk about scholarly or academic research. Let's talk about this. Just talk about the difference between scholarly and academic research. He said, what's the difference between someone like Imam Bukhari or Imam Muslim when they gather their chains of transmission and they go and they try to check that every single person in the chain of transmission is reliable and authentic and trustworthy and of sound intellect and so on and so forth, and the research done by, an Orientalist, like V.S. Nepal or someone like that. So someone who's doing what's the word in Arabic? Istishraqiyya, these Orientalist studies. And what's the difference between the two, right? Or Montgomery Watt, or these people in the UK. What's the difference between the two? And he says the difference between the two is that Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim believe in Allah on the last day, right? That's the difference, right? That's their incentive, right? So they know that in order to say that this hadith is from the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I need to be absolutely sure. I need to double check, and I need to look at all the people in the chain of transmission to make sure that they are all reliable, trustworthy, sound people. Because if I get this wrong in the next life, I'll be taken into account for this. That's how they're thinking. That's how Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, that's how they're thinking. Whereas your Orientalist, he's not thinking in those terms, right? He's thinking, well, I need to get the next research grant, right? I need to get the next academic post. I need to get a speaking position at the next conference. I want to have my name, on some lecture theater. I want to have a statue or a monument, right? So the incentives are totally different, right? So he says, and Imam al-Buti gives examples of this. He gives examples of how these people, these Orientalists, they'll cut corners when they're talking about the life of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they're talking about Islam in general, right? They'll quote stuff out of context, stuff like that. Why? Because they don't care about the truth, right? Because Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim care about the truth, and they're going to stand before Allah, or I should say, because they're going to stand before Allah in the next life, and they know that, that's why they're going to be caring about the truth. Whereas these other people know they're thinking about worldly motives. So we think about this: people who only believe in this life, think this is the only life that they have. They're not going to be patient with tests, and they're not going to be grateful for blessings. And on the top of that, they are going to cut corners. So on page 40, then we get to the crux here of why, or that we get to hear the definition. What is the definition of patience? So patience is, he says, in truth, patience is nothing more than attaching hope to some expected good. That's what patience is. That's the most basic definition of patience. Patience is nothing more than attaching hope to some expected good, right? So whatever tribulation you're going through, whatever hardship you're going through, you have patience. Why? Because there's some hope that somewhere along the line is going to change, right? Somewhere along the line, I'm going to get a payment. Somewhere along the line, I'm going to get over this illness. Somewhere along the line, I'm going to get away from this person who tries me, or whatever it is. Whatever your trial is, you have this hope. There's some hope in you that keeps you going, right? And this is a massive blessing. That like this, and this hope is not something to be underplayed. I mean, this is in Imam al-Suyuti, rahimahullah, in his book, Sharh al-Sudur, which is all about death, the very first, which question about hadith about death, the very first hadith in there, he talks about the creation of death, right? Where Allah said that he's going to create Bani Adam, he's going to create the children, he's going to create man to live on earth. And then the angels say, well, if you do that, the earth is going to become overcrowded, right? If you just create the species and they're going to procreate, they're going to take over the whole earth and there'll be no room. And then Allah says, and then Allah says, I will create death, right? So they're going to die after a certain point, they're going to create death. And then the angels say, but then they won't enjoy life, right? If they know they're going to die, how will they enjoy life? And then Allah says, I will create hope, right? So I will create hope. And that's what Allah's put in all of us. Everyone has hope. It's a beautiful thing. We underestimate it. Even the most ardent, hardcore atheist, if he found himself in the middle of the ocean, and he couldn't see any land, he couldn't see a boat, a helicopter, a ship, he couldn't see anything, right? He would still tread water. He wouldn't just think, oh, well, logically speaking, I have no chance, and just drown. He would have some hope. He would tread water and think, maybe someone will show up, maybe something will come up. We all have that hope. That's something that's inside of us. The Allah's put inside of us that we can't deny. So there's always that hope. So Imam al-Buti says, if there's no hope, there's no patience, right? And that's why people resort to things like drugs, and then ultimately, when people resort to suicide, because that's when someone sees that their situation is hopeless. That's the word, hopeless. They say, like, I just don't see any way out of this, and my life has become so restricted and hard and so forth, and I don't see a way out. Like the saying in English, we say, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, right? Or there's no silver lining on the gray cloud. So we want to make sure that because of our faith, because we believe in Allah, believe the next day, we always have hope. We always believe that Allah will give us a way out. And like I said before in previous sessions, and like Imam al-Buti says in this book, when we look at the hardships, we always want to look at like what is it that I can do to alleviate my situation? And one of the best ways, whatever hardship you're going through, the best way is, again, to draw near to Allah, to do more worship, to spend more time in dua, make more fervent dua, resort to certain things, right? Maybe use Salat al-Hajjah, pray tahajjud at night, read Surah Yasin more, do more adhkar. There's all these things you can do. Fast, just because the fasting person has a dua that's not rejected. And all these things, think about it this way, all these things, regardless of whether or not your dua gets answered, all these things are doing what? They're bringing you closer to Allah. All these things are bringing closer to Allah because you're spending more time in worship, you're spending more time in dua, you're spending more time in dhikr. And how is that not a blessing in and of itself? That's an amazing blessing. So Imam al-Buti says, the one who keeps complaining from the dark cellar that he's walking through should complain about his own denial of the destination that awaits him beyond the darkness. So this is on page 41. So this is an interesting point here. So what we're getting at here is, if you know where you're going and why you're doing it, then you can bear with anything. It's like the German philosopher Nietzsche. He said, he who knows the why can bear with almost any how. Right? So if you know why you're doing something, you can bear with anything that comes along the way. And this you can apply this to all kinds of things. Like so for example, if you start a course of study, you're going to do a BA or MA or a PhD, right? So you have that goal in mind, like, yes, I'm going to graduate in a few years, I'm going to get this degree. Because you have that in mind, you know why you're doing this, you're going to be patient with the classes you have to attend, all the reading you have to do, all the researching, all the writing, all the coursework, the fact that you're going to have to sacrifice certain things. You're not going to be able to, hang out with friends like you used to, go to cafes or whatever. You might have to come back on family time, but you're able to bear with it. Why? Because you can see, you've got your eyes on the prize, so to speak. There's a goal in mind that you're focusing on, and that's why you can bear with it. If there's no goal to focus on, then you're just suffering. You don't know what, why am I doing this? Why am I putting up with this? What am I getting out of this? and therefore your patience goes, right? So again, there's that hope. You're like, your hope is like, yes, I'm going through all this hardship, but the hope is at the end of this, I'm going to achieve something. And we're always hoping that at the end of this, we're going to be reward, like Allah will reward us for our patience, and then the next life we'll see the reward. In this life we can see the reward. We're always clinging on to that hope. So the hope is that hope that motivates us. So again, and this is what Imam Ramadan is going to get to in the next chapter, is he talks about again. So when we talk about happiness, we talk about success and these kinds of things. He says it's not something, this is what he talks about from the end of this chapter, moving on to the next chapter on page 43. So when we talk about happiness and success, we don't want to measure these in terms of material, thing. We don't want to say, okay, well, that person is happier, that person is more successful because he has a nice car, because he has a nice house, because he has a PhD, because he has a good job, because, that's not, because we don't know how that person feels on the inside. It's not just again, like we said before, it's not just the sense of, are they stressed? Are they anxious? Do they have lots of trials, tribulations? Because of course they do. But we also want to see, okay, how's that person's relationship with Allah? Is that person grateful for the extra blessings that they have? Are they using this extra wealth that they have, or whatever power they have, whatever influence they have? Are they using all of that for good, or are they not? Are they, are they squandering it and wasting it, and therefore not benefiting from this blessing, and therefore they're actually angering Allah? So that's why Imam al-Buti says on page 43, he says the contingent matters of this worldly life are everything it contains by manifestations of wealth, luxury, opulence, and various worldly arts and exploits. These are not how we measure it. Rather, consideration is given to the state the slave has ascended to. Right? What's important here is the state that the slave has ascended to. Right? This is what's important. And he said the word ascended. Right? And so it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. It's the state that your heart and your soul ascend to. And he says, whoever this person is, the slave who reaches this state is happy, even if you see him suffering from your point of view under various kinds of afflictions and tragedies. He is strong, even though you might think he's weak, right? Even though you might think he's weak, because, we might think of strong as someone who's physically strong or someone who acts tough, but it's not the case, right? The real strength is that inner strength. Is the strength of your heart. It's that inner strength. It's like I learned this only recently. I thought it was kind of fascinating. Like for example, like in the United States, when people trained to join the Navy SEALs, which is seen as like an elite military regiment, right? The Navy SEALs, and people sign up for it, and people think that, okay, the guy who would win, or the guy who would achieve and get a place, and in this military regiment, he'd be like, the big strong guy with lots of muscles, and he was he played rugby or football in high school, and he's 6 feet tall. He's 6 foot tall. He said that's not the guy they're looking for, right? Because they want to look actually more of the inner qualities. Because this guy might not have the patience. He might have a lot of arrogance. He might not have any sense of teamwork. He might abandon his teammates during a group activity because he's all about his ego. And so it's like that guy doesn't get chosen. So they might get the smaller, skinnier guy. So like, we like him because he actually has a sense of empathy. He actually cares about his team. He actually has a lot of heart. He has a lot of patience. He doesn't complain. So that makes him worthier. That makes him more in demand than the guy who, outwardly he looks big and strong, right? He's the big jock guy, but it's like, no, he doesn't have heart. He doesn't have courage. He doesn't have good manners. He doesn't have morals. He doesn't have patience. And this is why after this, Imam al-Buti gives examples of the Muslims themselves. He gives examples of the companions. The companions, may Allah be pleased with all of them, who were seen as, at that time, these are people who were illiterate, right? They did not read, they did not write, they did not have universities. They did not have great institutions of learning. They didn't have labs, right? They wore very simple, basic clothes, and they were nomadic. They didn't have settlements, a lot of them. But then they come out of the Arabian Peninsula and they take over the two greatest civilizations of that time, right? They take over the Romans and they take over the Persians. And that's why he mentions Khosrau and Heraclius. They demolished these people's, their kingdoms, just demolished them. Because this was their iman. This was what was inside of them. Their iman pushed them. Their iman pushed them and gave them that strength. And they had a goal in mind. They had a purpose in mind. So it's like you can think of it in terms of it's like there's objective, and on top of that there's intention, right? It's something I like to talk about. I like to talk about this with Jalaluddin and other people in private conversation. We talk about things like himma, right? Like himma aliyah. So like himma aliyah, like to have a high ambition, is a great thing to have. Like if you have a himma aliyah, like for example, like you have a business, you want to grow your business, you want to increase your knowledge, you want to increase your memorization, you want to be as they say, the best version of yourself. But this is all a himma aliyah, right? But on top of a himma aliyah is that there's an intention, right? And the intention is for Allah. And if you look around the world, the people who have himma aliyah, it doesn't matter whether they're Muslim or not, right? Whether they have a good intention or bad intention. Someone who has himma aliyah, someone who has a high ambition, is always going to just run over people who don't, right? So if you don't have a high ambition in life, there's not something great that you want to achieve. And I don't mean great in terms of like you're going to be the president of your country or something like that. I just mean like you have something that you're aiming for, right? If you sort of are a bystander, then people who do have high ambition, they'll just pass you by, right? And they'll take over. So for example, if you're in a certain type of trade, and you're just sort of content with where you are, someone else who's in the same trade will eventually take you over, right? Because they have more ambition, right? They're going to look at, okay, how can I improve my product? How can I improve my service? How can I make it cheaper? How can I make it more flexible? How can I make it more convenient? They're asking all these questions. And if you're sat there like, well, I'm content, I think my cafe is great. Well, that guy's going to take you over. So, but if we take that high ambition, if you think about here with the Romans and the Persians, is that they might have high ambition, like they want to have great empires, and the Muslims as well. They want to spread Islam everywhere. That's their himma. But on top of that, there's an intention, which is that they're not doing this for themselves, right? They're not doing this for the might of the Quraysh or the might of the Arabs. No, they're doing this for the might of Allah, to make Allah's kalimah al-ulya, right? To make Allah's word uppermost. So because they had that fearless attitude, that made other people scared of them, right? Because we only fear Allah. And that's why we have this famous statement from Umar al-Khattab when he was going to meet some of the bishops and other Christian rulers or Christian leaders in Jerusalem. And he was wearing like a garment that had lots of patches on it. And Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah said to him, like, are you going to go like that? Right? And this is when Umar Khattab, he said, Nahnu qawmun azna Allah Islam. He says, we're a people that Allah has made mighty with Islam, right? And without Islam, Allah humiliates us. We try to follow something else. Whenever we try to follow something else, Allah humiliates us. And so you think about this. Now, Imam al-Buti said this in another series that he's done, where he talked about in particular, like the qadam al-dul, like how do nations advance? Like how does a nation advance and prosper? And he says it comes down to two things. It comes down to, this is aside from Islam or no Islam. They say it comes down to akhlaq and ilm. Like you have to have ilm and akhlaq. You have to have knowledge and you have to have manners, right? There's some sort of knowledge that people have, and then they have manners. And manners are really important. The adab, the akhlaq are really important, because if people have good manners and good character, that means what? It means they can trust each other. They can trust each other. They can work together, and then they can rely on each other, and then they can build a nation, right? If people have bad manners, then they can't trust each other, and things go nowhere. But if they trust each other and they respect one another, then they can let each other work independently or together, and then things build up, and they build it together, and then they have ilm. And he says, and then Imam al-Buti explains, he says, now this adab and this adab and this akhlaq and this ilm, it might come outside of religion, and certain nations have done that, right? Like the Romans did that, the British did that, the Austro-Hungarians did that. They might do without Islam, right? But then when they become successful, that the success and the riches that can blind them, and he says at that point that's where they need Islam to remind them of where these blessings came from. But he said with the Arabs in particular, they had nothing. They did not have ilm, and they did not have akhlaq. They didn't have this, right? They were always at war with each other. They were always fighting with each other. They were burying baby girls alive, doing all kinds of horrible things, and they had no ilm. So what Umar al-Khattab is saying here is he's saying that that's what Imam al-Buti explained in one video. He said Islam is like the ladder that the Arabs climbed to get to this massive state, to get to this state of being powerful and having an empire. Islam was the ladder that they climbed. They didn't have anything else. Islam is what took them to ilm and adab. And if they take away that ladder, they have nothing. They have absolutely nothing. So he says we're a people that Allah made mighty with Islam, and without Islam, Allah just humiliates us. And again, if you look at what happened with the Arab world, look at the Arab world, especially like the last 100 years or so, right? When Arabs, especially when they try things like socialism or communism or whatever ism, right? It doesn't go anywhere. It just doesn't go anywhere because your original state was Jahiliyyah. That's your original. That's what you were. You were Jahiliyyah. Islam gave you that way out of it. If you turn away from Islam, then you just go back to Jahiliyyah, right? There's no other way around it. So this is what happened. I think, but we've reached. I want to do a bit more, but I think I'll stop from the top of page 45, inshallah, because we've reached 40 minutes. I think that's good. So I'll stop there, and I'll open the floor for questions and answers, inshallah. Walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah.